بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد وعن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله يرفع بهذا الكتاب أقواما ويذع به آخرين رواه المسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It is narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Inna Allah yarfa'u. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises the rank bihadal kitabi, with this book or by this book, aqwaman, ranks of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises ranks of people by this book. وَيَذَعُوا بِهِ آخَرِينَ, and he puts them down, he puts others by this book. This is reported by Muslim. From this hadith, we understand that this book over here means the Quran. This book over here means the Quran, and the hadith gives us an indication that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises some people because of their respect, because of their acting upon and taking the advices from the Quran, making the Quran as a manual for their life, and at the same time he puts others down because of not respecting the Quran, nor implementing, nor acting upon it. This is reported by Muslim. This is the meaning of the hadith. Now let us look into the grammatical aspects from the concepts that we have covered so far. An Umara. An Umara. Umara, why does it not have a tanween? If you remember from the first classes, we dealt with this topic, which was that it is from the ghair munsarif asma, right? And from that, we mean that the tanween is not present and the nasb and jar are of the same form. They look the same, right? So what is the raf' form of Umara? It is Umaru, Umaru, right? Umaru, Umara, Umara. So the raf' form is Umaru and the nasb and jar is Umara. That's why it does not have a tanween on it. Rasulallahi, Rasulallahi. Which form is this? Is this rafa', this is nasab, or this is jar? Jar. Why do you say it is jar? Rasulallahi. Allahi is in jar, that's right. And that is the topic for today. But Rasula is in nasb. Right? So Rasulullahi, the entire thing is in nasab. And the reason for why we'll look into it later on, inshallah. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam qala, Inna Allah yarfa'u bihadha al-kitabi. Bihadha al-kitabi. Right? So hadha al-kitabu, hadha al-kitaba, hadha al-kitabi. Right? This is, which murakkab is this from the concepts that we covered so far? Ishari, right? Murakkab Ishari, which has the musharun ilayhi and the ismal ishara, right? Aqwaman. Aqwaman is in nasab, as you can see. وَيَضَعُوا بِهِ آخَرِينَ. وَيَضَعُوا بِهِ آخَرِينَ. So I think this is, from what we have covered so far, this is good enough, and inshallah as we proceed into the course further, you will be able to understand in depth more, inshallah ta'ala. So we covered two murakkabat, right? Two murakkab naqisa. What were they? The first one was murakkab at-tawsifi, right? Murakkab at-tawsifi. And in murakkab at-tawsifi had the mawsuf and the sifa. Mawsuf and the sifa. And we know the rules for that. It is basically one ism describes the other one. It describes it. In English, we say adjectives, right? The quality, the attribute of the ism. That is murakkab at-tawsifi. The second ism, afwan, the second murakkab was murakkab ishari, right? And in murakkab ishari, we had the musharun ilayh and ism al-ishara, and it is basically demonstrative pronoun, right? And we looked into the different variations and the differences that we had. The third murakkab naqisa that we will look into this tonight. So if I write Zed's book, Zed's book. Okay, before that, so we know how to identify the two murakkabs, right? The two that we studied so far. The first one is that one is the quality of the other, and the second one has an ismal ishara, right? So that is how we can identify. Now, if I write this murakkab, Zaid's book. Now there are two words or two asma in this murakkab, right? What do you see with regards to the relationship between these two asma? What do we understand from this murakkab?
The book what do you call Zayed's possession?
Possession.
Yes.
That's right, possession. So there's some kind of relationship, right? There's some kind of relationship. So the third murakkab naqisa that we are going to study tonight is that murakkab naqisa in which the asma, they have a relationship together. They have a relationship together, right? So one ism is related to the other ism. To be more specific, one ism is possessed by the other ism, or it's like a property of the other ism. Something to understand the concept. So over here in this example, we have two asma. One is Zaid and one is book. And with this apostrophe that's there, it gives us an understanding that this book belongs to Zaid. This book belongs to Zaid, right? The murakkab in which one ism has a relationship with the other ism is called murakkab idafi. Murakkab idafi, right? It's called murakkab idafi. It means that one ism has a relationship with the other ism. That's the murakkab that we are studying. It's called murakkab idafi, and it has two parts again, like murakkab shari and murakkab at-tawsifi. It had two parts, right? So this again has two parts. So the main entity over here, the thing that is referring to, which is like the main entity in this murakkab, is the book, right? And then Zaid's book gives it the reference that this book belongs to Zaid. So the main entity is called Mudafun. It's called Mudafun, right? That's the first. And the thing that is referring to the main entity that has a relationship, it's called Mudafun ilayhi. It's called Mudafun ilayhi. Okay? In English, sometimes they translate this as possessor and possessed. Possessor and possessed. Like for example, Zaid. Zaid is the possessor. Zaid is the possessor. Even if you don't remember these words, that's all right. The important thing is to remember the Arabic terms, right? So, Mudafun is the entity, Mudafun is the main entity in the murakkab, and then Mudafun that has a relationship with the ism.
Can we take an
So mudafun is the thing that's uh, possessed or in possession, and possessor is mudafun ilayh. This is important to understand and remember, right? Coming to the rules, coming to the rules. So now we have to convert this English phrase into Arabic, right? This English phrase into Arabic. So how can we do that? Before we go into that, do you recall the sequence of the English and the Arabic in the case of number 1, Murakkab Tawsifi, number 2, Murakkab Ishari, right? So in Murakkab Tawsifi, in the English language, we have a tall boy, right? So which comes first, the Mawsuf or the Sifa?
The sifa.
In the English language, Sifa comes first, but in Arabic, the Mawsuf comes first. So the order is reversed, right? The order is reversed. So a tall boy, waladun tawilun, right? Waladun tawilun. So the Mawsuf comes first in Arabic and the Sifa follows Mawsuf. So the order is reversed. In the case of Murakkab Ishari, English and Arabic, they follow the same sequence. So if you want to say this book or hadhal kitabu, right? So the first word is this, and in Arabic it is hadha, right? It is hadha and this. So the sequence is the same. In the Arabic language, the mudafun comes first. The mudafun comes first. So kitabun, kitabun, right? There are two rules of mudaf. Mudaf or mudafun, there are two rules. Okay? The first rule is that there is no alif lam on the mudaf. Alif lam cannot come on the mudaf, right? That is the first rule. Alif lam cannot enter the mudaf. The second rule is that the i'rab of mudaf should be light. So you have to lighten the i'rab of mudaf. Now what do we mean by lightening the i'rab? Seems to be a new concept, right? It means that the i'rab that we looked into until now were all heavy. So for example, we have muslimun, and then we have muslimani, and then we have muslimuna, right? So muslimun, muslimani, muslimuna, musliman, muslimaini, muslimina, and then muslimin, muslimaini, muslimina, right? So this is for the mudhakkar. What about muannath? We have muslimatun. So it's nice to have the entire chart in front of you when you do this exercise. We are trying to understand the lightening part of the i'rab. How do we lighten the i'rab, right? So we looked into the mudhakkar. Now coming to the muannath, we have muslimatun, then we have muslimatani, then we have muslimatun, right? And then we have muslimatan, muslimataini, and then muslimatin, matin. Remember the atun, atins, right? And then in jar we have muslimatin, muslimataini, and then muslimatin again, right? So if you remember, the i'rab of wahid ism and the i'rab of jama mukassar, they are denoted by tanween, right? So let's take some examples. So for example, we have kitabun, which is a wahid ism, and then we have the jama mukassar, which is kutubun, right? Kitabun and kutubun. The i'rab of jama mukassar is shown by the tanween, right? Is shown by the tanween. And also the i'rab of jama muannath salim. Remember muslimatun, muslimatun, right? So the i'rab of number 1 wahid ism, number 2 jama mukassar only, right? Not Jama Salim. And number 3, Jama Salim Muannath, right? Muannas, not Muzakkar, is shown by Tanween. So whenever the i'rab is shown by Tanween, in order to lighten the i'rab, the simple formula is to just remove the Tanween. Remove the Tanween. So that is how you lighten the i'rab. That is how you lighten the i'rab. How do you lighten the i'rab? Of those asma in which Tanween is used. In which Tanween? You remove the Tanween. So kitabun becomes kitabu, kutubun becomes kutubu, muslimatun becomes muslimatu, right? Muslimatu. What about the i'rab of those asma in which we don't use the Tanween, rather we use the sound? Ani, aini, tani, taini, una, ina, and una, ina, right? Not atun, because we use the Tanween. What about them? So let's take the example of two books. Kita Bani, right? Kitabani. And then for Jama Muzakkar Salim, it would be in case of Muslim, right? Because Kitab does not have Jama Salim, right? So let's take the example of Muslim. So it will be Muslimuna, right? It is Jama Muzakkar Salim, right? In order to lighten the i'rab of those asma in which sound is being used to denote the i'rab, not the Tanween, the sound, the simple formula is to delete the noon. So kitabani becomes kitaba and muslimuna becomes muslimu. Right? So this is the formula for lightening the i'rab. Until now, the i'rab that we saw, they were all heavy, right? Now this is lightening the i'rab. So I said there were two rules of mudafun. We are still in mudafun. So there are two rules. What were the two rules? The first rule, that alif lam can never enter on mudaf. And the second rule is that it has a light i'rab. What about mudafun ilayhi? So what is mudafun ilayhi over here? It is Zaidun, right? So let's write the default word. What is the default form? It's marfu, right? So Zaidun, right? There is only one rule for mudafun ilayh. The rule is that mudafun ilayhi is always in jar. So Zaidun becomes Zaidin. Zaidun becomes Zaidin. Mudafun ilay is always in jar. And you know what is amazing? There are only two reasons in the entire Arabic language, there are only two reasons why an ism goes into jar. And this is one of the reasons, and the second we'll be covering in the next class. So jar is like one of the most easiest things to understand. Now the only problem is with nasab and rafa. When does the ism goes in nasab and when does it go in rafa? But jar, there are only two reasons why an ism goes into jar, and one of them is mudafun ilayhi is always in jar. Any questions until now? One thing to understand over here is we have written in the English language at Zaid's book. Now we can write it in another way as well, which is book of Zaid. We can write it in both ways, right? So how do we understand how the Arabs replaced these words, which is of and the apostrophe, right? So in the English language, we are using of or the apostrophe to denote the relationship. And in the Urdu language, if we want to say the same, we would say Zaid ki kitab, right? So the word for ki and the word of and the apostrophe, they are all replaced by the concept of i'rab, the concept of i'rab, right? So there is no ka, ki, or there is no of or apostrophe. Rather, the i'rab is used to produce that meaning, right? If I were to ask you, since the mudafun ilayh is in jar, what about mudaf? What about mudaf? Can it go into jar or nasab? Yes, it can, because it is a murakkab, right? A murakkab naqisa is used in a jumla, right? So it can go into nasab, jar, or stay in rafa. So the rafa form is kitabu zaidin. If I want to convert it into nasab, that would be kitaba zaidin, and jar would be kitabi zaidin. So now you can see that the mudaf is changing its i'rab, but the mudafun ilay is not changing. And that is also because of the reason that mudaf is the actual entity. Mudaf is the actual entity, right? If you were to ask, can mudaf be ma'rifa? Can alif lam come on mudaf? No, right? Because one of the rules was no alif lam, right? When we were studying the different categories of ma'rifa, can you go back to the section, if you have in your book, the different categories of ma'rifa? We said that in total there are 7 categories of ma'rifa. In total there are 7 categories of ma'rifa, and we covered only 5 at that time. And left places for the next 2. So in total there are 7, and we only studied 5. So now this is the 6th one. And its name is Mudaf ilal Ma'rifa. You can write it at the 6th position, Mudaf ilal Ma'rifa, which means that the Mudaf which has been made Ma'rifa. So Mudaf, when it is used in Murakkab Idafi, it is always Ma'rifa. So it's Ma'rifa by default, right? It's Ma'rifa by default. And now one can ask, but there is no alif lam over here, right? There is no alif lam. How can this be ma'rifa? So it does not matter that if alif lam is there or not. Mudaf can never have alif lam, and it is ma'rifa. So that is why it is the 6th category under the 5 categories of ma'rifa, and it is called mudaf ilal ma'rifa. What about mudafun ilayh? Is it ma'rifa as well? Yes, it is ma'rifa as well, because it is related to the mudaf. It is the mudafun ilay, and mudafun ilay is also ma'rifa because of the mudaf. So both of them are ma'rifa. Now since both of them are ma'rifa, if you remember the rules of jumla ismiya, mubtada is ma'rifa, right? So now this can be used as mubtada in a jumla ismiya, right? Let us look into some examples, and then we can go into the examples for the sentences. So if I want to say Hamid's book, what would be the Arabic for that? Kitabu Hamidin. If I want to say Saad's book, for example, Kitabu Saadin. If I want to say Ibrahim's book, Ibrahim ma. Why is it ma?
because nasb and because of the
Ghair munsarif, right? Ghair munsarif. So now, do you remember we had this question when we are studying ghair munsarif, that how do we know it is nasb or how do we know it is jar? Remember that question? So now you know. Is it nasb or is it jar? Ibrahima? It is jar, right? It is jar. Even though it looks like it is nasab, right? Because of the fatha, but it is in jar. And why is it in jar?
because of the mudaf ilayhi.
Because of the mudafun ilay. Mudafun ilay is always in jar. So Kitabu Ibrahima. If I want to say Umar's book, Kitabu,
Kitabu umari.
Kitabu Umara. Kitabu Umara, right? Remember an Umara, right? So an, that is the concept that we'll study in the next class, but just for the sake of understanding, whenever there is a harf jar before something, it makes the ism go into jar. And the an umara, umara is in jar, but it looks like it is in nasab, right? Because the umara and umara, like the nasb and jar, are the same form, right? So kitabu umara. If I want to say Allah's book,
Kitabullahi.
kitabullahi. Kitabullahi. Allahi over here is nasb or jar, right? If I want to say Fatima's book,
Kitabu
Fatimata.
Fatimata.
Remember?
Yes.
Yeah, because it is ghair munsarif. If I want to say Musa's book,
Kitabu
Musa,
Musa.
right? Musa, Isa. But Musa over here, is it jar or is it raf or what is it? Jar, right? Is it jar? It is jar. So let's look at some examples and then we'll go into the examples for the sentences. Allah's book. Kitabu, Kitabullahi. Allah's messenger.
Rasulullah.
Rasul,
Wallahi.
Rasulullahi.
Rasulullah.
If you want to say nasab, Rasulullahi. If you want to say jar, Rasulillahi. Right? Allah's house. Baytullahi. Baytullahi. Allah's help. Help. Nasrullahi. In Surah An-Nasr, إِذَا جَاءَ Nasrullahi. Right? So Allah's help, Nasrullahi. Allah's mercy, Rahmatullahi. Allah's fear, Khashiyatullahi. Right? Allah's rope, Hablullahi. Hablullahi. Allah's bounty, Ni'matullahi. Allah's punishment, Azabullahi. Right? Allah's camel, Naqatullahi. In Surah Ash-Shams, for example, قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها كذبت ثمود بطغواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم رسول الله ناقة الله. Right? So the nasab form is used over here, ناقة الله. So the main entity in mudaf and mudaf ilayh is what? Mudafun, right? Mudafun. Mudafun is the main entity and it changes its status according to however it is used in the jumla, right? So it can be rafa', nasab or jar. But mudafun ilayhi is always in jar, right? If I want to say Allah's path, right? Sabilullahi. So you might have heard fi sabilillah, right? Fi sabilillah. So fi sabilillah is in jar, and that is because of fi, which we look into at a later time, right? But we say sabilillahi, right? We also say fi amanillahi, right? In the protection of Allah. So it's amanullahi, and when it is used with fi, when fi precedes, it becomes jar. So fi amanillahi, right? Now let's try to convert these into Arabic, right? So this is a sentence, Jumla Ismiya, and we are going to translate it into Arabic. Remember the rules of Jumla Ismiya? What are the two parts of Jumla Ismiya? Mubtada and Khabar. So always separate Mubtada and Khabar before you begin your Jumla Ismiya, because it makes it very easy, right? So let's take the first sentence. Allah's speech is true. So what is Mubtada over here? Allah's speech, right? So this is Mubtada and this is Khabar, right? Allah's speech. Is it Murakkab Idafi? Right? Allah's speech. So what is the word for speech? Kalamun. Kalamun, right? So let us write it down. What would you write? The first thing is Kalamun or Kalamu or Kalamu. And then Kalamullahi, right? Why not Kalamallahi? Because this is Mubtada, and Mubtada is Ma'rifa, right? Remember Ma'rifa? So always remember that in order to indicate the i'rab, the main entity is the mudaf. That is something to keep in mind, because the mudafun ilayhi is always in jar, right? So it would either be kalamallahi or kalamillahi or kalamullahi, right? Either kalamullahi, kalamallahi or kalamillahi. So over here, because we are constructing a jumla ismiya, and jumla ismiya has mubtada and khabar, and kalamullahi is the mubtada, and mubtada is in rafa, nasb or jar, rafa, right? So it is kalamullahi. What about true? Haqqun. Haqqun, right? Haqqun. Kalamullahi haqqun. Kalamullahi haqqun. So what is the khabar over here? What is the khabar over here? It is haqqun, right? And mubtada is ma'rifa, khabar is nakira. Remember the rule? So kalamullahi haqqun. Let's take the second sentence. Qur'an is the speech of Allah. Qur'an is the speech of Allah. What is mubtada and what is khabar? Qur'an is mubtada and the speech of Allah is khabar, right? So how do I write? How do I start? Al-Qur'anu. Al-Qur'anu, right? Because mubtada is ma'rifa. So whenever there is ma'rifa, it would be right. Al-Qur'anu, right? Al-Qur'anu. Why did we add alif lam? Why did we add alif lam? Because this is ma'rifa. Ma'rifa, right? So this is ma'rifa, which means alif lam should be added. Al-Qur'anu, speech of Allah. Speech of Allah. Kalamullahi, right?
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
In the first sentence, you said kalamullahi haqqun.
Mm-hmm.
Why did we not add the alif lam al-kalamu? No, I mean that doesn't make sense, but still.
Kalamu. Kalamu. Is it murakkab idafi?
Murakkab idafi, yes.
Yes. And kalamu is the mudaf.
Mudaf.
What are the two rules of mudaf?
Alif lam cannot
Alif lam can never
never be
be
added.
on the mudaf,
Oh, yeah, because we are in different sentence format in the second one.
right?
Yes.
In the second one, In the second one, generally speaking, kalamullahi should have been nakira according to the rules, right? Because remember, mubtada should be ma'rifa and the khabar should be nakira, right? So kalamullahi should be nakira. But because the khabar is a murakkab idafi, and murakkab idafi cannot be nakira, cannot be nakira, right? Murakkab idafi is ma'rifa. It's the default rule. Like the same way, when we use murakkab ishari, and murakkab ishari, the ismal ishara is, what is ismal ishara? It is ma'rifa, right? It's ma'rifa by default. We cannot change it, right? So whenever we come across a situation in which it is either ismal ishara or mudaf or mudafun ilay, it is ma'rifa by default. So that is why when we said that rule, we said that generally speaking, the mubtada is ma'rifa, and generally speaking, the khabar is nakira, but it can also be ma'rifa. It can also be ma'rifa. And over here it is ma'rifa. So Al-Qur'anu kalamullahi. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. Is the messenger of Allah. This should be very easy. Muhammadu, not Muhammadun, right? Why? Because of mudafun.
And Muhammadu Rasul Muhammadur Rasulullah.
So this was like a bait in which you got trapped. So Muhammadun is not mudaf. Rasulullah, in Rasulullah, the Rasul is mudaf.
Oh, that's true.
So Muhammadun is,
Is Ghaibun sir.
no,
Ma'rifa.
Muhammadun is ma'rifa, right? Muhammadun is ma'rifa. And then Rasulullah, he, right? So Muhammadun is the mubtada, right? Remember the separation of mubtada and khabar? So Muhammadun is the mubtada and mubtada is ma'rifa, right? Muhammadun Rasulullahi. Now, this is mubtada and this is khabar, and inside the khabar you have a murakkab idafi in which we have a mudaf and a mudaf ilay. So the mudaf is Rasulu, right? Rasulu. And because it is mudaf, there is no alif lam, and the i'rab is light, and Allahi is in jar because it is mudafun ilay. So the khabar has a mudaf and a mudafun ilay. The khabar is basically a murakkab idafi, right? So Muhammadun Rasulullahi. Now when you, according to the rules of the tajweed, what happens when you say this? Yeah, so it's called idgham, right? It's called idgham. In tajweed, it's called idgham. What happens is, when there is, when there are any words from yarmalun, right? And over here we have a ra. So you don't say Muhammadun, rather you join the sound of the dal with ra, right? So you see how the rules of tajweed and the rules of grammar, they come together, right? So that's why you say Muhammadur Rasulullah. You do not say Muhammadun Rasulullah, right? Yusuf.
So I was kind of correct. I said Muhammadur Rasulullah, but the concept was wrong.
Yeah. So that's the reason why the tanween is written.
Yes.
If you look at the script, you will see that the tanween is there, but it is not read or pronounced. It is not pronounced, but it is written,
Yes.
right? So Yusuf is the prophet of Allah. What's the mubtada? What's the khabar?
Yusuf is the mubtada.
Right?
Prophet of Allah is khabar.
So will it be Yusufun or Yusufu or
Yusufu.
Yusufu? right? Why not Yusufun? Because it's ghair munsarif, right? Remember, only 5 prophets are munsarif, the names of 5 prophets, and Yusuf is not one of them, right? So Yusufu, and then Prophet of Allah.
Nabi, Nabiullah.
Similarly, we have Rasulu. Like how we have Rasulu, it should be Nabiyu, right? Nabiyullahi. And why do we have Nabiyullahi? Because it is mudaf, right? So there are 2 parts in Jumla Ismiya, Mubtada and Khabar, and over here the Mubtada is Yusufu, and it is a ghair munsarif ism, so that's why there is no tanween. And then there's the Khabar, and the Khabar is actually a murakkab idafi, in which we have the mudafun ilayhi, which is Nabiyu, and then sorry, that's right. We have the mudaf, which is Nabiyu, and then we have the mudafun ilayh, which is Allahi. So that's why we have Yusufu Nabiyullahi. Yusufu Nabiyullahi. So in these examples, we saw that the murakkab idafi, it can either be used as mubtada, as in the case of the first sentence where we used kalamullahi as mubtada, and it can also be used as khabar, as in the case of the second sentence, right? The second sentence we used the khabar as murakkab idafi. Inshallah, with that we'll conclude. Any more questions? جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.